Here is a place where the noise of the world cannot follow you, a place where the tongue grows still and the mind begins to see. That place is silence. In silence, the self is laid bare. No applause to feed pride, no argument to defend ego, no complaint to nourish resentment. It is in silence that one discovers what is true, because nothing false can stand without words to hold it up. The world rushes to speak, to react, to prove, to demand. But wisdom does not rush. It listens, it waits, it weighs. To speak is easy. To remain silent when one could speak, that is strength. From silence grows mastery, not mastery over others but over the self. The one who holds his tongue when anger calls, who stills his thoughts when worry knocks, who walks away rather than shout, that one has begun the long journey to freedom. We do not control what is said to us. We control only how we respond. And sometimes the greatest response is none at all. Not from fear, but from understanding that not every battle is worth the wound, not every voice is worth the echo. In silence, the soul sharpens. It reflects. It sees its own foolishness without flinching, and its own strength without boasting. From this soil, virtue rises, calm, resilient, unmoved by praise, undisturbed by blame. Let others chase noise if they must. Let them be carried by every wave of emotion, every gust of opinion. But you, seek stillness. Choose silence not as withdrawal but as power, not as emptiness but as clarity. For where silence leads, wisdom follows. And in that quiet path one finds peace, not as the world gives, but as only the soul can hold. In silence we find the first glimpse of truth, not because silence holds answers, but because it removes the noise that clouds our ability to see clearly. When we are constantly surrounded by chatter, opinions, arguments, and the persistent demands of the external world, our perception becomes blurred. The truth is subtle, quiet, and easily drowned by the urgency of our thoughts and the expectations of others. It does not force itself upon us. It waits patiently for us to be still enough to notice. The mind, when left unchecked, races. It clings to narratives, invents problems, defends illusions, and fills every moment with commentary. Most of what we consider thinking is merely noise, reactive, restless, and repetitive. But in silence, the mind begins to slow. Thoughts lose their urgency. The narratives we cling to start to unravel. In that stillness, we begin to see ourselves, not the image we present, not the roles we play, but the raw, unfiltered core of our being. This self is not adorned with achievements or defended by words. It simply is. And it is only in silence that we truly meet. When we strip away the constant flow of input, when we are no longer reacting to what someone said, what the world demands, or what we believe we must project, we create space. In that space, insight arises. Not the kind of insight that inflates the ego, but the kind that humbles it. We begin to see how much of our daily speech is unnecessary, how much of it serves to protect a fragile image of who we think we are. We begin to notice how we speak not to understand, but to persuade, to control, or to escape discomfort. In silence, these patterns become visible, and only what is true remains. Truth does not need to shout. It does not fight for attention. It does not rely on argument or persuasion. It stands silently unmoved, waiting for the eyes that are quiet enough to see. In the stillness of silence, we begin to hear this quiet truth. Whether it is the truth of our condition, our responsibility, or the impermanence of all things. And though this truth may be difficult, it is never cruel. It is simply honest. It does not flatter, but it also does not deceive. Silence is a mirror. It reflects what we are without distortion. It shows us the roots of our desires, the fears we bury beneath constant talk, and the motives behind our actions. When we are no longer busy defending or performing, we begin to understand ourselves with painful clarity. This understanding does not come from judgment, but from observation. Silence gives us the patience to observe without interference. And through that observation, we learn to recognize what is real and what is constructed. Many seek truth in external sources, books, voices, teachers, ideology. While these can point the way, they cannot substitute for the clarity found within. Unless the inner world is quiet, the outer world will always mislead. Silence does not provide us with content. It clears the mind of clutter so that we might recognize the truth already present. It does not fill us with new ideas, but it exposes the old ones we have accepted blindly. In doing so, it makes room for wisdom. There is a reason why truth has long been associated with quiet places, Deserts, mountains, temples, cells. These are not sacred in themselves, but in what they represent: the retreat from distraction, a return to stillness, the willingness to listen rather than speak, to observe rather than assume. In such places, the ego has less room to perform, and the heart, no longer drowned in noise, begins to perceive. Self-mastery begins not with grand gestures or dramatic renunciations, but with something far quieter and far more difficult: restraint. To hold oneself back when every part of the mind urges reaction is no small feat. It requires a discipline that is not outwardly visible, but inwardly transformative. The most immediate and constant opportunity for this discipline lies in how we use our speech. Words are tools, but also weapons. They can soothe or harm, uplift or degrade, clarify or confuse. To govern them is to begin governing the self. Anger, pride, envy, fear. These emotions often seek their outlet through a sharp retort, a boast, a complaint, a bitter remark. All of these are temptations to discharge emotion outward, to rid ourselves of discomfort by passing it on to others. But to pause, to allow the emotion to rise and fall without giving it a voice, is to take the first step in mastering the storm within. The one who speaks from impulse is ruled by impulse. The one who waits, who watches the impulse without obeying it, begins to rise above it. Restraint is not repression. It is not the denial of emotion, but the intelligent holding of it. Just as a dam channels the force of water without destroying it, so too does restraint allow the energy of emotion to be observed, understood, and redirected. This requires practice. It requires vigilance. It requires the humility to know that what we feel in a moment is not always what deserves to be expressed. Not every thought is wise, not every feeling is justified, and not every truth needs to be spoken. The practice of restraint is hardest when we feel most entitled to speak, when we have been wronged, when we know we are right, when silence feels like surrender. That is when the challenge is greatest, and thus when the growth is greatest. It is easy to be calm when nothing provokes us. It is something else entirely to remain composed when the fire is rising in the chest and the words are forming on the tongue. The measure of a person is not in how they behave when unchallenged, but in how they hold themselves in the face of provocation. This holding of the self is a kind of inner architecture. It builds strength not by force, but by structure. It is the difference between a scattered will and a disciplined one. Each moment of restraint is a brick laid in the foundation of character. Over time, this foundation becomes unshakable. The words of others lose their power to disturb. The internal state becomes less reactive, more steady, more deliberate. And from that steadiness, real freedom emerges. Not freedom to indulge every urge, but freedom from being ruled by them. There is also a dignity in restraint, a quiet power that does not need to assert itself. To hold one's ground without shouting, to endure insult without retaliation, to walk away when pride urges confrontation, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs of a person who has chosen command over chaos, who values peace over performance. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. Strength often whispers. It stands firm without needing an audience. The one who practices restraint does not suppress their humanity, but refines it. They become more intentional, less wasteful with their energy. They speak less, but when they do, their words carry weight. They are trusted more because they are not ruled by fleeting passions. Their calm becomes a refuge for others. Their silence, when chosen wisely, becomes a lesson in its. Restraint cultivates a presence that does not demand attention, but earns respect through stillness and consistency. Not every battle deserves a voice. There are moments when silence is not only wise, but necessary. The impulse to respond, to defend, to strike back, is deeply rooted in our desire to be seen as right, to protect our ego from perceived threats. But reacting to every provocation, every disagreement, every insult is a form of enslavement. It means we are ruled by the words and actions of others, pulled into battles that exhaust us, that distract us, that leave us emptier than before. The disciplined mind knows that the true test of strength is not how many battles it wins, but how many it chooses to avoid altogether. Speech has a cost. Every time we speak in anger or self-righteousness, we invest our energy into something that may not yield peace or clarity. Words launched in the heat of the moment rarely serve wisdom. They serve vindication, retaliation, pride. And pride is a demanding master. It whispers that silence is weakness, that to let something go is to be defeated, but the opposite is often true. Walking away from a meaningless argument is not a loss, it is a declaration of sovereignty over one's own peace. There are battles that look important on the surface but are hollow underneath. A harsh word from a stranger, an insult born of ignorance, a disagreement that has no bearing on our deeper values. These are not worthy of our breath. When we engage, we often escalate. What could have been a passing moment becomes a sustained conflict. Our minds become occupied with proving a point rather than understanding anything of substance. We rehearse what we should have said, replay the exchange, and allow our emotional balance to be determined by someone else's behavior. In truth, most verbal battles are rooted not in principle but in ego. We feel slighted. We feel the need to correct. We want the last word, but the need to be right is not the same as the need to seek truth. Truth is not threatened by silence. It remains what it is, whether spoken or not. The ego, however, feeds on noise. It cannot stand to be ignored. It thrives on conflict because conflict validates its sense of self-importance. Choosing not to engage with every challenge then becomes an act of self-liberation. Some may mistake silence for submission. But silence, when chosen deliberately, is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect. It says, "I know who I am. I do not need to convince you." It refuses to let another person's chaos dictate one's own clarity. It allows the mind to stay centered, unshaken by the shifting moods and opinions of others. In this way, silence becomes a shield, not of avoidance but of discernment. It is not a call to cowardice or passivity. It is a call to strategic wisdom. Some conflicts matter. Some truths must be spoken. Some wrongs must be confronted. But the wise person knows how to distinguish the essential from the trivial. They do not raise their voice over every slight. They reserve their strength for battles of real consequence. They do not allow others to bait them into petty exchanges because they recognize how valuable their attention is, how limited their energy, how sacred their peace. Letting go of the need to fight every battle is not about being indifferent. It is about recognizing what deserves our engagement. It is about choosing the long view over the short win, self-respect over self-assertion, clarity over noise. The world offers us endless chances to argue, to defend, to retaliate, but every time we decline those chances with quiet dignity, we remind ourselves of a deeper power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to govern ourselves. Listening is the foundation of wisdom, yet it is often the most overlooked. In a world that rewards those who speak quickly, react fast, and assert their views with confidence, the discipline of listening appears passive, even weak. But true listening requires immense strength. It demands presence, humility, and restraint. To listen is to hold space, not only for others, but also for the quiet voice within that is so easily drowned out by the clamor of external noise and internal chatter. It is in this still attention that understanding begins to take root. The one who listens learns, not because they absorb information like a sponge, but because they approach each moment without the need to dominate it. They do not listen to reply. They do not listen to prepare their counter-argument. They listen because they know there is something to see beyond the surface, something that words alone might not reveal unless approached with patience and clarity. In listening, they begin to discern not just what is said, but why it is said. They notice tone, pause, tension, contradiction. They observe what is present and what is missing. This deeper form of attention opens the door to true understanding. Listening also teaches the listener about themselves. It becomes a mirror. When we listen carefully, without needing to interject or steer the conversation, we confront our own restlessness. We feel the pull to interrupt, the rise of disagreement, the need to correct. These are signals from the ego, not the intellect. The urge to be heard is natural, but the wisdom lies in recognizing when that urge serves truth and when it merely serves pride. To remain silent and attentive in the face of disagreement requires a kind of surrender, not of one's beliefs, but of one's need to assert them constantly. The wise person listens more than they speak, not because they lack conviction, but because they understand timing. They know that words spoken from a place of calm insight carry more weight than words thrown out in haste. They know that wisdom is not just having the right answer, but understanding the right moment to speak. Listening cultivates this sense of timing. It slows the mind down. It creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, discernment grows. There is also a generosity in listening. To truly listen to another person is to offer them your attention without condition. It is to say without words that their experience matters. It does not mean agreement or approval. It means presence. And presence is one of the rarest and most healing gifts we can give. In offering that, we strengthen our ability to empathize, to connect, to see beyond the narrow frame of our own perspective. Wisdom is not just knowing what is right. It is seeing the whole picture, including the parts that challenge our views. Listening extends beyond conversation. It is also how we meet silence, how we attend to the natural world, how we observe our own thoughts without judgment. It is a skill that transcends language. A quiet mind listens to what is unsaid, what is implied, what is felt. It detects subtleties that the distracted mind misses entirely. In this way, listening becomes a spiritual discipline, a method of tuning into life itself without rushing to define, fix, or explain it. To cultivate wisdom, one must first learn to receive. The soil must be soft for the seed to take root. Listening softens the mind. It makes us teachable. It allows knowledge to transform into insight because it is filtered through reflection and humility. A loud mind gathers opinions. A quiet mind gathers understanding. The wise, therefore, do not chase every chance to speak. They wait. They listen. They allow truth to rise naturally rather than forcing it forward through noise. Stillness is the condition in which virtue can grow. Without stillness, the mind remains agitated, scattered, pulled in every direction by desire, fear, and distraction. In this restless state, there is little space for reflection, little chance for deliberate action. The virtues, patience, humility, courage, temperance, are not reactive impulses. They are cultivated qualities, shaped over time through intentional practice. Stillness is the ground in which they take root. It allows a person to step back from the flood of sensation and impulse and observe themselves and the world with clarity. In stillness, the noise of the world loses its grip. The opinions of others, the endless comparisons, the pursuit of status and validation, all of these begin to fade when one is no longer constantly reacting. This quiet is not merely the absence of sound, but a deeper inner silence. The mind no longer consumed by worry or craving, the emotions no longer erupting in uncontrolled bursts. From this space one can begin to discern what is right, not just what is easy or popular or immediately rewarding. Virtue is not about appearance. It is not demonstrated by loud declarations or dramatic gestures. It is shown in the quiet choices made when no one is watching, in the discipline of holding back when provoked, in the strength to do what is difficult when there is no reward. These choices require a mind that is not at the mercy of passing emotion. They require a mind trained in stillness, one that does not leap at every temptation or flee from every discomfort. Stillness makes room for honesty. It becomes possible to see one's own flaws without defensiveness, to recognize the ways in which pride disguises itself as principle or fear as caution. Without this stillness, the ego rushes to justify every impulse, every action. But in quiet observation, the mind can no longer hide behind excuses. It must face itself. This confrontation is not easy, but it is essential. Virtue cannot be built on self-deception. It demands a foundation of truth, and truth only becomes visible when the waters of the mind are calm. A still person does not mean a passive one. Stillness is not inaction, it is poise. It is the ability to choose one's action rather than be driven by compulsion. It is the readiness to respond with intention rather than react with instinct. When the world is chaotic, the one who remains still becomes a source of stability. Their presence does not add to the noise. Instead, it anchors those around them. In this way, virtue extends outward. It becomes a quiet influence, a force that shapes the environment through example rather than argument. Humility, too, grows in stillness. When a person no longer needs to prove themselves constantly, when they are content to act rightly without demanding recognition, they begin to move with grace. They are no longer caught in the performance of virtue. They live it quietly, steadily. Their actions are aligned with their principles, not because they wish to be seen as good, but because they have come to value goodness for its own sake. This kind of humility is not false modesty. It is a deep recognition of one's place in the larger whole and of how little noise is needed to do meaningful work. Stillness also reveals how little control one has over external events and how much control one has over internal responses. This understanding fosters resilience. It teaches that while storms may come and go, one's integrity need not be tossed with the winds. When rooted in stillness, a person can endure hardship without bitterness, success without arrogance, and loss without despair. They become steady not because life is easy, but because they have learned to hold themselves upright even when life is. This steadiness is the fruit of virtue, and virtue in turn is the fruit of stillness. Silence is often misunderstood as a lack, as if something is missing where words should be. But the truth is that silence, when chosen deliberately, is a form of power. It is not the silence of fear nor the silence of ignorance, but the silence of one who understands that not everything requires a response. It is the expression of one who has mastered themselves enough to refrain from noise for the sake of clarity. This silence is full, not empty. It contains discipline, confidence, and depth. It is the mark of a person who is no longer compelled to prove, argue, or impress. There is a kind of power that demands to be seen and heard, that pushes its way into the center of attention, needing constant affirmation. And there is another kind, quiet, steady, and enduring. This second kind does not announce itself. It does not rise and fall with opinion or recognition. It is rooted in something deeper than appearance. Silence is its language. It speaks not by volume, but by presence. The person who chooses silence in a world addicted to speaking exerts control over themselves. In doing so, they reclaim a kind of authority that noise can never achieve. Words once spoken cannot be retrieved. They carry weight and they leave traces. To speak carelessly is to scatter pieces of one's energy in every direction. To speak